for it and make sure we're sharing it.
I think we're sharing. It says we are. Thanks for tuning in, folks. And for those of you that are lucky enough to watch this afterwards, today I have with me, she's that way, Razi Berry. Razi's a friend of mine, health and wellness practitioner, the editor or founder of the Naturopath magazine, and starting yesterday, the founder of the great set of 60 plus interviews on the Heart Revolution with some phenomenal people, all talking about the emotional, physical, spiritual healing of the heart. And I guess I just wanted to start off with, first of all, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
And second of all, how did you come to this? Why did you decide to put this together? Because I know putting these online summits are really difficult and take a lot of your time. So it must have been something in your past that you just were searching for, helping heal yourself.
Yeah, well, we always have a story, don't we? And for me, it was in my adulthood that I found natural medicine. But as a child, I suffered from heart failure. I was in the hospital at age 14, dying of heart failure. But it was actually the result of an eating disorder, which is, it's a typically female disorder, although it's more and more men are suffering from it as well. So my heart was suffering because of that, and I was raised Catholic, so my parents had to bring in the priest to do last rites and everything. And so what happened though is as I was dying, I had a near-death experience, and it was something I'd never heard of before, right? I was just a young teenager, and I really didn't understand what was happening. But I remember my mother had brought my 4-year-old brother at the time in, and they were saying goodbye. And I was just kind of laying there in the hospital bed, and suddenly I was above in the room, looking down on my mom, looking down on my baby brother, looking down on the doctor, and it was kind of scary. I felt really kind of insecure around the hospital staff because they kind of treated me like, an eating disorder is something you do to yourself, right? It's not just as when you're stricken with an illness. So I'm all of a sudden swept up in this. It was kind of like being in the middle of a dewdrop or a raindrop, and imagine like the light reflecting just back and forth. That's the best my child mind can remember it. It was like being in the center of this overwhelming feeling of love and acceptance. And I don't want to bore your audience with all the woo details of that, but it's fun to talk about it with you because, with your dual doctorates and your strong belief in the mind and body being connected, that experience healed my heart. I left the hospital on no medications and my heart was healed. So it was really profound. And from that point forward, I became more aware of my emotional and spiritual heart. And even as a young girl into my teens and early adulthood, I really became a seeker of spiritual truths. And I really wanted to find that feeling again that I had experienced.
Right. Well, I think you hit the nail on the head with the heart. It's so metaphoric, but we talk about, healing, heart, love, and how it's not just the physical heart attack, but we talk about having a broken heart and how metaphorical that is, just in medical terms, as well as, psychology and spirituality. And I noticed the thing that I really liked about the way that you have the conference set up is you kind of have it broken down into different categories and different sections that people are talking about different things. Like in the section that you spoke to me about is more about kind of that, that energetic aspect or the non-locality of healing another person by things like positive thoughts or prayer, whatever you want to call it. And then you have other people like talking about, the nutrition side of things. And I wanted to ask you, since you've talked to so many people and obviously you've been preparing this for months, I mean, you've spoken from people with MDs and even MDs like Eben Alexander, who had the near death experience himself and has had a major best selling book about it. What has really impacted you in this time frame of just doing all these interviews? I mean, what has really been driven home for you?
Well, that's a big question, but I think at the end of the day, whether I was speaking to a scientist, a clinical scientist, a researcher, a life coach, a relationship expert, an OBGYN, a cardiologist, at the end of the day, I think that we as humans really have this yearning to explore the nature of our hearts and discover our hearts. And so it was really a really warm experience for me, because even if I spoke with a doctor whose practice every day is very clinical and helping people treat, high blood pressure or cholesterol issues, or they've had heart attacks in the past, there was no one that I spoke to that felt like, no, this is just an organ that pumps blood through your body. I felt like everybody really was almost relieved to have an opportunity to speak about the mind-body connection, or the heart-mind connection, or the heart-body connection. And that was really, really beautiful for me to experience.
Well, you had the interview where you talked to HeartMath. I don't remember who you spoke to. Yeah. So what's fascinating is they've come out with some wonderful research that even shows your heart rate variability. If you have 5 people in a room that are all in a good mood, and one person walks into the room that is in what they would consider a negative kind of frame of mind, or they're angry, before they even talk to those other people in the room, the other people's hearts will match this person that walked in, and vice versa. So even just being in proximity, and I always use this analogy of how if you're walking down the street in, say, New York, and you can smell cigarette smoke, to be mindful of that. We can be angry about it, but the mindful piece of that is that what you're breathing in was obviously inside this other person's lungs, right? I mean, because they just exhaled it. Unfortunately, you have the trailer that you have the cigarette smoke, but I think we're all breathing the same air. We're all partaking in this same matrix of energy. And it really fascinates me that like we said, we talk about a broken heart, and we talk about how, couples that have been married for 50 years, one spouse dies and the other dies days later, because it's just their soulmate, their heart, that's a piece of them. And I just think I would love to obviously watch all these, but, obviously I think is it 7 or 8 days you're doing?
8 days. 8 days.
So how does somebody watch all these conferences? I mean, if they don't have the 8 days to sit in front of their computer?
Yeah, so for the 8 days, they're all free, all 63 lessons
that's awesome.
From like your heart chakra to the best nutrition to fitness, grief, loss, play, exercises to laugh more. And so what they can do, Shawn, is they can buy the recording. So they can own all 63 interviews to share, or to watch them at their leisure.
But and then you can watch them as much as you want. Like they're yours?
Mm-hmm. Yep, they get to keep them, just jump drive, download them, and watch them whenever they want, or just listen. Their audio files and video files, so you can listen to them. There's some interviews that I've done that I like to listen to sometimes when I'm cooking dinner, or before I even go to bed at night. It's just fun. So, but to touch a little bit on what you were saying about Dr. Roland McCrae from HeartMath, it's really neat, because how recently in the news we think we've discovered some more planets? Remember reading about that? Yeah. Well, a lot of the research they're doing now, I mean, they've done so much research about, human to human, this heart field that we can measure 3, even 4 feet from our body. And if people are in coherence, then it's a good, happy, warm feeling. It actually helps each other's nervous systems. Well, a lot of the research they're doing now is about the Earth's electromagnetic field, how that feeds our hearts, and vice versa. And I can't help but think now, everyone's talking about earthing and grounding, and we have some doctors speaking about that as well. We know that Earth gives off these electrons that our body needs, and they're really like antioxidants. Well, the research that HeartMath's doing now shows that truly affects our heart, and vice versa. So now with these planets, it's just like you said, this matrix. We're starting to really get the scientific proof behind what we once thought was science fiction or romance.
Right, right. Or even, that kind of love at first sight, that feeling that you've known somebody before, even though maybe you haven't met them. I think that's kind of a coherence of sorts. And when we talk about coherence, for those that may not know what that is, it's when your heart patterns, when we inhale as human beings, our heart rate tends to speed up. And then as we exhale, it slows down because of the stimulation on the vagus nerve. And if you look at somebody's heart rate, somebody that's very healthy, they'll have a pattern that's very swingy. It's like a sine cosine from those horrible days of high school math. People that have a very small coherence pattern tend to be less healthy because they're just very constricted. And when the number, I see this the most in my practice, actually, when we're doing babies, because we put the fetus on the monitor all the time, and we watch for what we call heart rate variability. And the heart rate variability, if it's very flat, tells us that the baby's not doing very well. It's not happy. And that means physically as well as other ways. But, even something, if you give the mom a dose of morphine or a narcotic, their heart rate variability will flatline. And so we talk about this from even in utero, there's a heart rate variability. And I wonder, I'm actually going to talk about this in September. I'm in a keynote at Kappa, which is a huge conference for midwives and doulas. And I'm going to talk about how moms can get into heart rate coherence with their fetus, which is a fascinating concept, but something we don't really talk about. We talk about mother's intuition all the time and how moms know what's best for their babies. I think that's even before you deliver. So the whole concept of coherence is really interesting to me. As far as psychologically, people that are married. Oh, we lost her. She'll come back. If you guys have any questions for Razi regarding the Heart Revolution, that's airing for the next 7 days, I'll post a link. But yeah, I was just filling in, telling them that you were testing my MC skills. I was just telling them that if they wanted to ask questions, they could online, or we could definitely post. I'll be posting the link after the conference so that they can join in. But if there's questions that you have, maybe you're already tuning in and you have a question about the actual conference, or you have a question about some of the lectures, or you have a question for Razi just about herself, or why she's doing this wonderful thing that she's doing, go ahead and type them in.
I want to add really quick to what you're saying. I can't wait to hear the talk that you give this fall to the doulas and midwives. But we do have a really special interview with the late Joseph Chilton Pearce. He wrote The Crack in Cosmic Egg and The Mystical Child. And he was really before his time with regard to that sort of maternal bond with the unborn child and then children as they grow. And we were able to work with Michael Mendiza with the organization Touch the Future, who does a lot of research on play, to get us some footage from Joseph Chilton Pearce that hasn't really been seen before. And he talked about that coherence and that communication between the baby, the unborn baby, and the mother, and how that bond and how that energy really sets the stage for the child's whole life into adulthood. And it's really beautiful. And it's so neat to have some of his legacy here at the Heart Revolution. And then Michael Mendiza talks about this idea of play being not just something you do, but a state of, a state of consciousness where we are interacting in a non-contrived way with our environment that is really important to emotional health, our physical and emotional heart health. So it reminded me of that when you were talking about this upcoming talk you're going to do. But both of those interviews are beautiful, awesome. And they're also here at the Heart Revolution.
Right. I think I just need to take a week off so I can sit in front of my computer. So I think we all know about the physicality of the heart, and why we have heart attacks. But even that, I think, is somewhat old news. I remember when I was a little kid, and a friend of my dad's had a heart attack, and they made him eat. They told him to stop eating butter and made him eat margarine. I mean, if you're old enough to remember when margarine was a health food, and now we're getting away from that again, and we're going back to these good fats and the concept of, things like, I think we got into that low sugar vibe, or the no sugar, but then we were eating all these horrible fats. And now it's more to eat, good fats and, coconut oils. And so do you have people talking about that kind of stuff as well?
Yeah, absolutely. We do. We've got Dr. Joel Kahn, who's a cardiologist, Dr. Stephen Masley. We have both of them talk about heart health, and some more towards the plant-based diet and all the research there, and some a little bit more on the healthy fats. We also have Ben Lynch from Beacon Health Institute, and he talks a lot about where nature and genomic medicine converge, because, just looking at genetic medicine is sort of silly, because our genes are so susceptible to our thoughts, our emotions, our actions, the environment. So that's a really fascinating talk. And then Peter D'Adamo from the Institute for Excellence in Genomic Medicine, he also wrote the blood type diet you might be familiar with, and talks about, both of those talks are really fascinating because they talk about these ideas of nutrition, but also from a real personalized point of view. We're moving into this new age of personalized medicine instead of that old model of just one size fits all. When a patient presents with this, we test for this, we prescribe this, we do this. And it's really nice to move away from that model. And then we've got, a homeopath, Dr. Tom Cruzel, who talks about homeopathy, which is for people that aren't understanding what that is. There's this new understanding about nanomedicine and the energetic level and imprint that we know that things leave. So there's a lot of fascinating things with medicine. Also, you touched on, heart attacks, how some of those thoughts are changing. Yeah. We have Dr. Thomas Cowan, who is kind of bringing to light some of what Rudolf Steiner had first written about the heart. How can the heart really be a pump when we have, miles and miles of veins and arteries and capillaries that are so small, and we have this blood that is so viscous, bringing all these nutrients. There's stuff in our blood, right? There's life in our blood, and to every cell, and then bringing it away. So there's some new research, really taken from some old thought, but newly emerging research that the heart is actually not a pump. It creates the way that it's shaped and the size and the pressure. If you look at the physics of it, it's really not possible for that organ to really pump all this blood through all these capillaries. Yeah. So what they're finding is it actually creates this vortex that helps regulate, and the blood is sort of self-propelling. Blood is a living thing, and Dr. Gerald Pollack discusses that, and the fourth phase of water. And then we have Dr. Kaufman, who is an anthroposophilologist, such a hard word to say, anthroposophy. But from like the Steiner, also Steiner, talking about this new way of looking at our heart, that it's so much more than a pump, and how it really intuitively works with your brain and your environment and your blood to all give information to each other to create that heart rate variability, to create the blood flow. And this idea that lactic acid builds up in our heart, sometimes before a heart attack, is something really new, because when we have lactic acid build up in like our calf, we get cramping, but we stop running, we can stop and rub the muscle. You can't do that with your heart. So all of these topics, I'm just I hope I'm not making anyone dizzy just touching on each of them, but this whole new way of looking at our hearts is emerging outside of all the emotional aspects we talk about. We are really talking about some real breakthroughs in science, medicine here at the Heart Revolution.
Well, I think the thing that you've just shown is just in that one little section of, physicality. You've got people like Rudolf Steiner, who founded Waldorf, years ago. And, you got Joel Kahn, who I don't know Joel personally, but I can't eat vegan. I wish I could. And Peter D'Adamo, who my blood type, I'm A negative, he says that I should be a vegetarian. So I can't necessarily, I can't believe that either because I like bacon too much. But I think it's definitely not a bad way to eat for sure. And but yeah, it's just all that stuff is so fascinating. I think even just that little area that you touched on would be enough for people to really get a lot out of. And then you have, the energetic side. And what I always tell people about energy, everybody cringes when you mention energy medicine. I think it's got kind of a bad name. But what's the number one thing we do in medicine that measures energy? We do an EKG. So the heart has energy. We know it does because we measure it all the time. The brain has we measure EMG. We measure brain waves all the time. So we know that the heart has an energetic component. So who's to say that somebody putting their hand on your chest or, hugging you or whatever isn't going to change your rate of heart attack by physicality, by lowering your blood pressure or, helping just rearrange the energy. It's true. It's really fascinating to me to think that, because we worry about cancer for some reason. We worry about things, that we can put in our mouths and stuff, but we don't worry about when we're driving to work and somebody cuts us off and we get angry and we stay angry until we get to work and then we work angry. And just changing that paradigm, I think, can help heart attack risks. And I'm not being a holier than thou, because I certainly need to work on this myself. But as you all know, life gets in the way, kids and jobs and marriages and relationships. I mean, it's a work in progress. So what sort of spiritual practices do you see in the interviews? Like, what do you find that there's a lot of research being done on? Obviously yoga and stuff, but what other things are out there that people are talking about?
Well, when you just talked about relationships, anger, even marriage, one of the free videos you get right away when you register for free for the Heart Revolution is an interview with Dr. Stephen Stosny. And I first saw his work once when he was on the Oprah Winfrey Show. And he is a specialist PhD in anger and resentment. And he's treated over 6,000 angry and abusive couples. He really understands what causes cycles of abuse, whether it's physical, verbal, neglect, and just anger. And he's got this research about how you can access this most primitive part of your brain, so you start reacting in your adult brain, right? Because from our childhood, and it's amazing because he came from an abusive childhood, and so he transformed that. And he said that we get in these patterns from our childhood. And then since it takes so long for our prefrontal cortex to be fully developed, you're 24 or 26 years old, I think, depending whether you're male or female, excuse me, he says you constantly kind of react to or go back to that primitive part of your brain, and it causes these cycles of anger and resentment. He further goes on to teach how anger can actually be temporarily analgesic. And so people often, when they're feeling bad or ashamed about something, they turn to anger and blame because it's a temporary pain relief. And he talks about how dangerous that is because it can be addictive. So that's a beautiful interview. Then we have Christina Rasmussen, who talks about grief and how that affects your heart and how to move past grief and loneliness. And then we have some spiritual paradigms being taught too. We've got a Sufi teacher who, if you think of Rumi poetry, from the Sufi tradition, and he's written books on translated a lot of Rumi poetry, and their philosophy is really about, having a heart for God or the creator or whatever that means for you. But in the Sufi tradition, they say God. Right. And so it's really about, finding that love of God and understanding how much God loves you. We've got a traditional Huna healer.
Oh, good.
It's just fantastic. And then when you mention yoga, we have Dr. Madan Kantaria, which is a super fun interview. He is the founder of Laughter Yoga International. Because laughter is isn't it fun? So he does some exercises. I actually embarrassed myself on camera to do these exercises with him, and to really start laughing.
I was in a room full of doctors, and we all lay on the floor head to head. And so it wasn't him, but it was somebody that worked with him, just would basically start laughing. And you all start laughing because, you can't, if somebody, first of all, you think it's kind of weird, but then you're literally busting your gut because everybody's laughing and you literally can't stop. And it's really fascinating because it's so therapeutic. You're actually kind of tired afterwards in a way. And you can't be mad when you're doing stuff like that.
No, it's wonderful. And the science that he found, he was publishing a journal, and he wanted to do an article on laughter being the best medicine, but he didn't have the science behind. So he's spent his life now researching that. But one of the things they found is that if you force a laugh or if you naturally laugh, your body chemistry reacts the same way. So whether you do like these laughter exercises that turn into an actual laugh, but whether you kind of start it in a contrived way or if it happens organically, your body still reaps all the benefits. And if you when you watch the interview and you look at him, I mean, he's just got such a young aura about him, and he really emanates a lot of joy. But speaking of joy, then we also have some people that we talk to, like, for instance, J.P. Sears, who a lot of people know as ultra spiritual guru that makes us all laugh. Well, our interview with him is really serious. It's not about the humor side, although we talk about how he segued into that. But we talk about the spectrum of emotions and how all emotions are healthy to feel. Maybe we have to make sure we find healthy ways to deal with them and to express them. But we talk a lot about just kind of that shadow self that he calls it, or I call it the dark corners of our hearts that really... a lot of our health issues or issues with addiction or relationship problems come from trying to avoid feeling those negative emotions. I bet you see that a lot with the women that you treat.
Well, I think what happens, from my personal perspective, even in the training of physicians, I think we're sort of taught. It's funny because you go into this profession wanting to help, and because you have a big heart usually, but then you're kind of taught to dissociate a little bit. You're taught not to get too close and to be a little bit more objective than subjective. And so not only do they come in, patients, because we're busy, not just the doctors, but the patients. We've got, she lost me again, but I'll keep talking. We've got situations where people don't necessarily want to look at themselves. I know you disappeared. I
had to cough off camera. I keep getting this dust in I'm so sorry, everyone.
That's okay. But I was just saying how people don't want to connect with maybe why an instance that I can talk about is pelvic pain, because the reason for the pain may be too painful to bring it to your conscious if it has to do with physical abuse or something like that. And so it manifests as pain. And it is, and Joe Tata talks about that in his book, but we don't I just talk to the patients, we focus on what could organically be wrong, what could physically be wrong, instead of who's going to, in 15 minutes, ask, well, have you ever had, sexual or physical abuse? I mean, I do that, but that's not something you can address in 10 minutes. And it's not necessarily something that people want to address. They're coming in because they might have a problem with reflux, or they think it's chest pain, but maybe it's not from the heart per se. But I think what's fascinating is that I think, and you probably think the same thing, most of, especially having involvement with all the naturopaths that you do, that a lot of our care could be self-care. It could be self-care oriented. And what a better place to start that than on your heart and the way you just look at the world. And like I said, I need to learn this probably just as much as the next person, but it's true. And I think it would definitely help with a lot of the things that are going on. I wanted you to kind of segue, because I don't want to go on too long. How can people find, or or what kind of, like you said, they can tune in tomorrow and see whatever's on the docket for tomorrow. Is there a schedule that they can look at?
Yeah, so if you go to, you're going to post the link here, I think,
Yeah.
at Revolution. So if you go there and you just register, then it'll open up, the schedule for you, the welcome email. You can take a look at all of the interviews, so that way you can kind of plan for the next week. And if there's stuff you want to keep, there's packages that you can buy, the recordings, either audio or video or both, that you can keep forever and just have, like more than 60 hours worth of lessons, all focused on our heart center. And yeah, like you said you have a lot to learn. Well, I do too, and that's why I did this revolution. I remember one time in my 20s when I was struggling with fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue. This was prior to me finding naturopathic medicine, which I found, and that's what caused me to start the journal that I published, Naturopathic Doctor News and Review, and then start the patient website, Natural Path, is that I was told by a doctor that it was all in my head. And that was a terrifying moment for me. It was scary. But looking back, I think, that's okay, because one of my favorite scientists, the late Candace Pert, who was a cell biologist and researcher, and she discovered just so many neurotransmitters and pathways in our body. She says the body is the subconscious mind. And so what I like to say is that even when we talk about the mind and body connection, we're still wrong, because the mind and body aren't connected. The mind is the body and the body is the mind. I mean, people that meditate can say, well, I take my mind somewhere else. But yes, you're still, right now, you're living. Like, I had my near-death experience, and I definitely went somewhere else, but my body was still alive. I was still connected to the earth. And so what I'm trying to say is that you can't say, I'm going to treat the mind and the body, because it is all you. It's all Razi. It's all Shawn. It's all, we are, right now, while you and I are talking, our heart is automatically regulating blood flow that contains so, neurotransmitters and nutrients and so many things throughout every cell in our body. Our cells are constantly replicating. You're absolutely right. There's electricity inside of us. There's electromagnetic fields. There's energy that we probably don't even understand. And all of this is happening while it's knitting our cells together and healing and growing. Our hair is still growing. So you can't really separate. You can't really separate the two. It's just all one. And so that's why I call this a revolution, because it's time that we understand that the mind and the body aren't just connected, or the heart. It's all part of being human.
Right. And that's a good thing to. Oh, I'm getting feedback. Are you?
Hello. We love feedback.
No, I'm getting feedback on my. Like who? I don't want to hear myself. Yeah, no, that's bad feedback. So I would encourage everybody to check out the Heart Revolution. I think there not only will be one or two things that you get out of it, but I'm guessing a ton. And I can speak for me. I have about a 20-minute drive to work in the morning, and I love to listen to like podcasts and things. So if you had this downloaded, you could listen to this in your car on the way to work, right?
Right.
Yeah. So what a great way to practice anger management, and then in your car, probably be the best way to do it. But I wanted to thank Razi for coming. I know she has two little girls, and they probably need you for something. I'm sure there's always something. So I'm gonna close the broadcast by it's the Heart Revolution. You can either go to the website for the Heart Revolution. Is it org?
Yeah, the Heart Revolution.
Or you can go to the website that I have posted, and you don't have to feel overwhelmed. You can buy. Can you buy singles, or do you have to buy like a whole setup? How can you do it?
It's not very expensive. I think it ends up being like $2 per interview or something like that. But,
Perfect. So not a huge investment to really listen to a bunch of luminaries. And you don't know Razi, but she has one of the bigger hearts in the world that I've ever met. And it's been a pleasure being your friend. And I look forward to when we can talk again in the future. Thanks very much for coming on.
Thank you so much. Yes, I treasure our friendship, and I'm really proud of all the work you do to help women live healthier lives. So thank you.
Thanks for coming. Talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye-bye.